Welcome back, dear listeners, to the Waiting Warriors podcast. As many of you know, it's been a challenging couple of years for me. Life took a very unexpected turn, and our son James was stillborn, and I had to take a step back to heal, grieve, and find my way through the storm. I am excited to bring this podcast back, and I have plans to make it even better than before. I have done, I had done a dozen or so interviews before we lost James. And since the guests and the content were so good, I can't not publish them. But for my mental health, I'm not going to edit them the same as I normally would. So please forgive any mistakes, any little weird things. But I am excited for you to hear these amazing military spouses. And then season 2 of the Waiting Warriors podcast will be coming shortly. Enjoy the interview. Hey, Waiting Warriors out there. Welcome to another week on the Waiting Warriors podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Buller. And today we have my friend Rachel, who has a not one of a kind, but I was just calling her like a unicorn in the military community. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Long-time listener, big-time fan, first-time appearance.
There you go. That's a good tagline. I like it. So Rachel's a Navy wife since 2014, though her husband's almost at 20 years. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
It is.
She works remotely as a marketing communications professional for a nonprofit and runs Countdown and Cupcakes. I almost said Countdown to Cupcakes.
Hey, you know what?
We just want to count down to those cupcakes.
Yeah.
It's Countdown and Cupcakes, which helps military families stay connected through deployment, because she has these awesome care package flaps that I've shared on Instagram before. So it either you can decorate your care package box in any theme that you could possibly think of. At least anything I've ever thought of, you've thought of and have, and it's really, really cool. But Rachel's going to be on today because they are in the process of adoption. In the adoption process. Yeah. Whatever that which is why I say you're kind of a unicorn, because I know there's a lot of misconceptions about being in the military and adopting. It's not something that a lot of people think because of everything that the military implies, but you guys are doing it. So I'm really excited. Obviously, nothing that Rachel says is like the laws, and we're not going to go into all of that, but I think it's super helpful to hear other people's experiences. One, so then if you've thought about adopting, you can know the possibilities. But then two, I think now I just made a huge group of us who are not adopting. This one big group, we can have a lot more sympathy, because it's a process.
It is.
Capital P.
Yeah. All capital letters sometimes. But what in the military is not a capital P process, honestly? I think, I appreciate you kind of setting the stage there, and certainly want to reiterate, I am not an adoption legality expert, technical expert. This is all from the experience that my husband and I have had, and up until this point. But there are so many, like you said, misconceptions about adoption in the military community. The biggest one being we can't do it. It's not something that we can do. And I was one of those people when we first started talking about adoption, about growing our family, whichever way we decided to do it, we kind of discounted adoption entirely because we had that same misconception that because we're the military, we would move all the time. And my husband's job is dangerous. They're not going to think that we qualify, that we shouldn't adopt a child. And very quickly realized that was not true. So if that's the one of the sticking points for people, like you can let that one go. There's a lot of
Mhm.
other, ins and outs and question marks and layers of difficulty, but that one is not one of them, which is really
Mhm.
nice and was very reassuring for us as we started this journey to hear not only from agencies but also from other military families. So happy
That
to
was
kind of
gonna
share
be
our experience.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question is how did you find out that that's a misconception? Was it just you saw other military families, or did you talk to an agency? What was
We
that?
did. Yeah. So we did talk to agencies and we flat out asked, like, look, my husband's in the military, will be in the military for an additional 10 plus years.
Mhm.
Is this something that we can do? And they, without hesitation, without exception, all said yes.
Mhm.
And they warned us that, parts of it can be more complicated because you move or you have extra paperwork or whatever it might be. And we can talk about that a little bit as well. But
Mhm.
it's possible. And then I was like, well, if they say it's possible, there must be other military families who have done this too. We can't be the only people.
Yeah.
And very quickly started finding people on social media and support groups on Facebook and elsewhere that were in our same similar shoes. And so, much like the military community as a whole, right, that there's so many varied perspectives and so many varied stories. And we found a little niche of military adoptive families that helped kind of reassure us that this was possible.
That's awesome. So, can you kinda take us back to the beginning? And we don't need to get you can get as personal as you want to because I know, like, I I mean, side rant, like, it boggles my mind when people ask like, "Oh, you've been married for however many years and you don't have kids yet?" Like, and then they start asking these questions. It's like, do you realize what you're asking people?
Right.
You know,
Right.
and I even like I'm pregnant with baby number 5 and we've only been married for 9 years and yet I still get these questions, so it's like, I don't know. I do not I do not mean to be that, like you can share whatever you want. But if you could take us to the beginning of this process and what just kind of take us through the process that you've been through so far and what that's been,
Yeah.
both like logistically and emotionally, because I know some people, it's good to hear from other people.
Exactly. So yes, I think a lot of people approach adoption after dealing with perhaps infertility in their own relationship, and we are sort of in that same boat. On adoption was always something that I had considered, that my husband had kind of considered separately, and as we had been married for a few years and gotten those questions over and over and over again, when are you having kids? Why don't you have kids yet? Why are you waiting so long to have kids? Because my husband's a little bit older, I'm a little bit older, right? um, we were like, okay, first of all, our decision, but
Yeah.
we want to talk about this. And we started bringing it up into conversation with each other just a little bit more. Like I would mention it very passing or in passing. And then my husband would, like a few weeks later also mention it in passing. And so when we moved from North Carolina to DC, our last PCS, we sat down and we had that conversation. We'd been married for 5 years, and we really dug into it and had the conversation, not just with each other but with our families as well,
Mhm.
about their feelings about us adopting, about our feelings about us adopting, and really pretty quickly came to the decision that it's something that we wanted to pursue. What that looked like technically, legal wise, like the exact like path that we took was still very much up in the air because we weren't sure.
Mhm.
We didn't know what we didn't know,
Yeah.
essentially. But we knew that it's something we wanted to look into. So we started what military families freaking rock at, and that's research. Um, when you get orders somewhere, what is like the 100% first thing you do? You
Mhm.
start researching
Yeah.
everything about where you're going. And adoption was the same way, right? Like I treated it in that same vein, that this is something new, it's something I'm unfamiliar with. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to learn everything I possibly can about this process so that I can make
Mhm.
the best decision with my husband for our family. So,
Mhm.
research was the biggest step for us. And as we started researching, we realized that there were a lot of different paths we could take to adopt.
Mhm.
You can do international or domestic. You can do foster or private adoption. You could do an agency. You could self match. Like there's so many different ways that you can go about this process, and each one of them changes the process pretty dramatically.
Okay.
So if you're a family, a couple, a single person, whatever you are thinking about this process, that's kind of the first step that you need to start looking into these different options and having really honest and sometimes difficult conversations with yourself and with your partner about what that process looks like and what you're
Mhm.
comfortable with. So we spent a lot of time there, like digging
Yeah.
into what our options were and what we wanted out of the experience.
Mhm. Yeah. And you guys went with domestic, right?
We did. We decided to go domestic. We also decided to work with an agency, and this was one of um, I think because we were in the military and we knew that there was a chance we would be moving, we wanted an agency that worked nationally so
Uh-huh.
that no matter where we went when my husband got orders, we could still continue working with the same agency.
Right.
And that's certainly something to consider as you're talking about this process as a military family. How long are you going to be at this duty station?
Mhm.
If it's 6 months, it's probably not the time to start the process. If it's 3 years, yes, go for it. But because it takes so long, you want to give yourself the time to actually be able to finish it out, or you have to start over the next time you move.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure you have that time. So when we decided that we wanted to do a national agency, we wanted to do a domestic adoption, we started researching agencies. So, like, there's that next layer of research that we did, like spreadsheets and tabs and all kinds of different stuff to find the best fit for us after interviewing them, after reading
Mhm.
reviews, after talking to people who had worked with them. I mean, it was from start of that process to us actually signing and filling out paperwork with an agency was almost 6 months. It
Wow.
was, yeah, it was a long process because we didn't know what was
Mhm.
out there, and we
Right.
needed the time to go through that and really dig into it. So
Yeah.
that took a really long time, but I think it was worth it because we found the right fit for us, and I think that's super important for a family.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with like what you're talking about. Like, I don't know. It's, I can't even think of something equivalent because, like, it's not even like how much time you put into finding a new OB when you move, because at least I'm the wrong person. I'm just like, like,
Well, but
like
think too, like,
a
all the
20
research you probably did when you had your first
pieces.
baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you didn't know anything, like,
Yeah.
you had no
That's
idea,
true.
and I mean, as intimate of a process of having a child is, now you
Yeah.
have a third party that's involved in this
Yeah.
process and is digging into your life and who you are as a couple. So you have to be sure that you feel comfortable with them. But you also, for us, a really big piece was the way that they interacted with expectant moms and
Okay.
expectant families. Because just because something's legal doesn't mean it's ethical, doesn't mean it sits well with me
Yeah.
and my husband. And so that was as important as it was for us to be comfortable. We also had to be comfortable with the way that they treated the other part of this process.
Yeah.
It's easy to kind of go into adoption thinking, oh, I'm going to have a
Mhm.
baby at the end of this. But there's a whole other family that's
Mhm.
involved in this process that you are forever linked to. And I want to be able to look my child in the eye in 20 years and say, look, like we did the very best we could to find the agency that treated your first family with the respect that they deserved.
Yeah.
So that was part of our interview process with agencies. We asked some really tough questions of them to make sure that they met the standards that we had for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. That is a really interesting point because that's not something I would have thought of, not because I don't care, but because I think I'm a really naive person who just likes to assume that, like, agencies in particular, like businesses and agencies, are just, of course they're gonna treat the
Right.
expectant mom, but then, like, I don't know, I've been this week has been a lot of like, um this is kind of a side tangent, but just like with it being Black History Month
Hmm.
and seeing a lot of like how Black women are treated
Yep.
in the healthcare, what are the words? The healthcare process, I guess.
Mhm.
Like, it's just astounding. I'm like, wait a second. Like, not in a no way that can't be happening because these women are telling their stories and you don't discredit
Right.
them. But it's like, I don't know. To me, it's just like a no brainer of course everybody's treated well. Like, of course you would. So it's weird when people don't. But that's a really good question
Mhm.
to be asking. Um,
And it's not one that they always wanna hear. Um,
yeah.
and that's sad. And the more that I dug into this process and the more that I researched, the more I realized that I needed to learn and listen to adult adoptees and birth
Mhm.
moms and first families because they experience adoption in an entirely different way than me as an adoptive parent.
Yeah.
Um, and to hear some of their experiences and things that they had gone through that I had, like you, I had never even
Yeah.
thought of, right? I had this very puppies and rainbows picture of what this experience was going to be like. And it's still a happy experience for us, but it's
Mhm.
also a very tough experience for a whole nother set of people. And you want to find a place that acknowledges that and empathizes with that. And so, yeah, if you're looking into this process, if this is a step you want to take, please, 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 please listen to birth moms, listen to adult adoptees, ask really tough questions of the agencies or the lawyers or whoever you're
Mhm.
working with to make sure that they're doing what's right, not just what is legal.
Yeah.
And that's so important.
Yeah. That is a really, really good question. I like just that phrase, like what's right versus what's legal. Like there's
Hmm.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. What have been some of the misconceptions that either you had or you realize a lot of people have that have been unveiled or whatever?
Well, I mean, definitely that idea of it of being a happy experience for everybody.
Yeah.
That band-aid had to come off, and it had to come off hard for me
Mm.
because I am one of those people that views that moment as wonderful, right? And for us,
Yeah.
it will be wonderful. But also for us, it's going to be very difficult because I think my husband and I both recognize and empathize that for our child, our future child's first family, this is not a happy moment
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah.
And so sitting with those uncomfortable and conflicting emotions, like I didn't realize that I was going to have to work through that and that my husband was going to
Mm.
have to work through that. Um, and so that was a whoa, like I need to process that. And I think the military kind of helps with it because we go through periods of time where we have very conflicting emotions about stuff and like you're excited but you also recognize that this is really hard, and
Mhm.
trying to live with like a dual set of experiences. Like my husband's a great example. He loves getting deployed because he
Yeah.
loves doing his job, but he
Mhm.
also feels the heartache of missing his family. So like
Yeah.
there's that set of dual emotions that
Yeah.
you have to balance. So that was a big misconception for me and a big thing I had to learn very, very quickly. Um,
Mhm.
I think another one was just how, I don't want to say invasive because that sounds really rude, but it very intense the home study
Okay.
process is. I like my husband and I know each other, and like we know that we're excited to be parents and we'll be good parents, and our families and friends think that, right?
Uh-huh.
But now we're having to prove that to a stranger,
Yeah.
and that is also like it seems counterintuitive that you have to prove all of these things, but especially being in the military, we had some extra layers of difficulty trying to finish out our home study process.
Okay.
So it didn't make it 100% harder, but it definitely made it more difficult.
Okay. Yeah. Because well, I mean, like everything with the army, it's not necessarily impossible, but it's not the smooth path either.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, so part of our process was we had to provide local references of people who knew us. We had been here less than a year.
Yeah.
We didn't have people like that we felt comfortable asking to like
Yeah.
vouch for our ability to parent. So that was hard. My husband had lived at like 32 addresses from the time he was 18 until
Oh,
now.
you wanted all of them?
We had to
I
report every single one of them
I
for
hate
his
that
background.
question.
I was like, "Alan, like, I don't know what to tell you, sweetie, but you're gonna have to go back and dig through your personnel record to come up with something because, like,
Yeah,
this is hard." So again, it's not impossible, but it's just like one more layer where you're like, "Oh, this is a little harder," or like, "Oh, this is more complicated than I thought." So, that military mantra of, like, being organized and hanging on to stuff, right? And, like, keeping things pulled together, I cannot stress that
yeah.
enough because it took us a long time to finish out some of that stuff. We had to have extra background checks because we had lived in more than one state within the past 3 years. So we had to wait longer for that. It was that hurry up and wait thing because then we'd send out all the paperwork and we just had to wait until they
Yeah.
approved us. So, yeah, the military definitely made it a little bit more complicated. Not impossible, like you said, but a little bit more complicated.
More complicated. Do you have any tips or resources for military families? Or
Yeah,
anything that sorry, you don't provide them, just to clarify for everybody, but that you have found tips that you have found and discovered tips and resources for military families.
Yes. So I think there are some fantastic military focused adoption and foster care support groups. I can send the links to you so that you can include them maybe in the show notes for people. And they are a wealth of information. They are a wealth of information from a very specific perspective. So if you're looking
Mhm.
for adult adoptees or birth parents, that's not where you're going to find that. So you'll have to look elsewhere for that. But those groups helped me answer those questions like, well, my husband has 32 addresses. Like, what am I supposed to do? Right. They helped with some of that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
those are a great resource. I think, too, there are so many groups and adoption advocacy groups that can teach you some of these underlying questions, some of these underlying concerns, that concept of right versus legal or ethical
Mhm.
versus legal, right? There are so many groups that do that as that's what they do, that's what they focus
Yeah.
on. And I think that's an important resource to seek out as a military family, but even not as a military family.
Yeah.
And then tip wise, I would start like if this is something you're interested in, start pulling together that kind of paperwork, right? Like pull out your file that has all of those birth certificates and social security cards and start having your service member dig into their personnel file to find all of those addresses that they've been stationed at or lived at. Oh man, it was so many. It was so many. Make sure all of that stuff is in order as you
Uh-huh.
are doing all this research, right? Like start
Mhm.
gathering some of these things so that when the time comes and when the paperwork shows up at your door, you don't have to scramble to find it.
Yeah.
Um, and then the military teaches us, right? Like deal with the uncertainty, like go with the flow. And as hard as that can be, that like the military teaches us that all the time. So that's definitely something that you, as a hopeful adoptive parent, are going to work through quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any resources for adopting families? Because, like, I don't know. I don't want to say it's not fair because TRICARE covers the birth, right? Like, or like as I'm giving birth
Right.
for that. But like, is there any monetary help that comes in?
So this will vary depending on your unique circumstance, but more often than not, the birth mother's expenses and the baby being born expenses are
Uh-huh.
covered through Medicare or Medicaid. So that is handled separately from us as an adoptive family.
Okay.
Once the baby is born and paperwork has been filed and there's like a whole list of steps, you can then add that child into your service member's record as a dependent, and now they are covered as part of TRICARE. The military does offer a reimbursement of sorts for a certain amount of money towards your
Mhm.
adoption expenses, but it's only after your adoption has been finalized.
Okay.
So you're not getting that upfront. It's something that you would receive your spouse or your service member fills out the paperwork after the adoption has been finalized, and then you receive the credit back. Um, so there's a lot of grants and a lot of uh, I guess grants is the best word. There's a lot of grants out there that you can apply for that help offset that cost as well. But
Yeah.
it's something that you have to be further into the process in order to qualify for more often than not. So there isn't like, it sounds awful, but there isn't like a military discount kind of
Right. Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
And that was definitely something that we learned kind of as we went, and we started seeing, oh, well, once the baby has arrived and our adoption is finalized, we could apply for this credit back. And there are some of those programs. There's not
Mhm.
many out there,
Yeah.
but at least the military has one, whereas some people don't have that at all. So
Yeah. Did did your command have to know what was going on? Because it's like, I don't know. There's always this weird line of like personal life and
mhm.
professional life.
So I asked my husband this question before I started doing like putting my notes
Yeah.
together to talk to you. And he said no, like they weren't
Yeah.
required to know. He did not have to like notify them for
Right.
clearance or purposes or whatever.
Okay.
But he really recommends that you keep your command and your leadership in the loop, because he had to take time off in the morning one day to do his interview for our home study. We are likely going to have to travel somewhere to meet our child for the first time at a pretty short amount of notice,
Right.
because it's when the baby is born, right? And you can't
Right.
control that. So, those kinds of things, and talking to your command, and having them, I mean, my husband's command was everything. Like, they were so supportive and so excited for us,
Mhm.
but having them know so that as some of these, like, oh, I got to do this too now, and like, oh,
Yeah.
I need an hour here, that helps because they know why and they
Right.
understand why. Like, we had extra medical appointments that we needed to both have in order to fill out some of our forms. So,
Mhm.
like, his command knew that he was doing it for that reason. And so they were much more flexible and very
Yeah.
helpful in working with him. So,
Yeah. It's all this whole world is so interesting because like it's a whole it's its whole world. It's its own world. That's what I was trying to say. Wow. Hard. But I really appreciate you coming on talking about it because, I don't know if this is ever a road we'll come in, but it's really interesting and good to hear your perspective and your experience because, otherwise everybody's just clueless. So, especially for those listeners who are considering it, I hope you see it's possible. It
Mhm.
There are roads that you can go by, but also just I feel like you've given us a lot of ideas and things to make sure that we're thinking about to help us plan because now it's like I feel like we could make a military adoption binder just like
Yeah.
a yes, that's what my dorky self wants to do,
With
right?
tabs and color coding, right?
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
okay, we got this big project, let's make a binder because that's just what I do for some reason.
I totally get
So last question, what is your key to thriving, whether it's like through this whole process or just military life in general? What's your key to thriving you want to share with your fellow waiting warriors?
I always try and remind myself of it's very cliched, but this too shall pass. And
Mhm.
I remind myself of that in the tough moments, like when we're stuck waiting for medical forms to come back or background checks to come back, or my husband is deployed. Like, that's going to pass.
Yeah.
But so are the really good moments too. And so, as you want to get through the tough stuff, but you also want to remind yourself to savor the good stuff. And so, reminding yourself that, like, the hard moments move on, but this really great moment is also going to move on. Like, I need to savor it. And
Mhm.
it helps me kind of like live in the moment and not be so focused on the things that I'm quote unquote worried about. So
Right.
that's my key, definitely.
I really love that. Because like it is slightly cliche because people say it
Hmm.
all the time, right? Like this too will pass. I know I say and think it all the time, but I'm always thinking of it as like, okay, this toddler phase of getting in the soap and putting the soap in her hair, this will pass.
Yep.
That's literally been my thought every single day.
Yep.
But that also was like a really good reminder, like the good moments of this, like nothing lasts forever type of a thing.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
I totally love that. Um, if somebody wants to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
I am super active on Instagram, so you can follow me at RA McQuiston on Instagram. I share a lot of care package tips and tricks, but I'm also around to answer questions about adoption or just like life in general. So I'm
Mhm.
around.
And she really does have like actual tips for care packages. I know we kind of mentioned like you sell the flaps, which are super awesome and really cool. But also if you have like questions about that. I know we didn't talk about that in the interview, but she's your girl. She
I
yeah.
love talking about care packages. I get very passionate about care packages. So if you want to have a conversation about that, I am around.
Awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. I know this is like it's a very personal thing, but I know this will help a lot of people, both who have thought about it but didn't know if it was a possibility, but then also for us who can just sympathize and hopefully offer more support to the adopting families and show you guys love because you're being through a process.
Yes, the capital P process.
Capital P process. Well, thanks for coming on the show, Waiting Warriors. Remember, just because it's hard doesn't mean it has to be miserable. Have a good week, guys. Awesome.
If you love Red Friday, remember everyone deployed, but are like me and not totally loving everything you're seeing online or at the PX, I would love for you to check out my Red Friday design. You can see them quickly. There's a link in my bio that just says Red Friday t-shirts. There's a shop button on the website, thewaitingwarriors.com, or there's a quick link in the show notes. There are shapes and sizes and styles for everyone, from father-in-law to the dog. Enjoy.